Now, so let us continue, right, that what we have discussed. So we are getting this issue because we have already the database, right? So on which database? The e-commerce DB. I think we have not modified the database name. So go to the DB context and here check what is the database. So e-commerce DB. So let me remove this and provide EFA core DB. Now it is better, guys.
Yes, sir. It's better.
Far better.
Fine. So let me open the package manager console and let me create this one more time. So update database, add migration one. This is already exist. Give me a different name, migration two, and update the database. Yeah. So database is created. Now you can verify the database and you should see the EF core DB database with two tables and one table for maintaining the migration history, right? So we are not getting this one. Let me refresh this one. Close all. Okay. Okay. Sometimes it happens. So what you need to do, you just need to restart your SSMS, right? Or you can say Visual SQL Server. So once you restart it, should work as expected. If you are getting this issue that you are unable to write, uh, check the data of the tables, right? Just restart and it should work. Now you can see it should have the respective migrations, right? So MIG1 and MIG. So this is already there, right? So now what I need to do is I need to show you, right, how to perform the database operations. And then I will discuss, right, how to, right, why it is bad to provide the context, provide the connection string directly in the application code. So for this purpose, right, whatever code I'm writing here, I will explain all these things, right, in detail. For now, just see. So first of all, what I'm doing here, I'm creating one branch object that is computer science, providing the branch name, description, phone number, and email. And inside this branch entity, this is going to be my primary key. And this primary key is auto-generated. Means what we do not need to provide any value for the ID column. So this is my branch, second branch, and here, right? What code I have written here at this point of time? Don't go to the code, right? I'm going to explain, right, each and everything, right? How to add, how to update, how to modify, how to delete, right? Every functionality I'm going to discuss. Just for now, let's check, right, whether, right, it is the updating, inserting, and deleting data into the database table or not, right? So run the application, right? So you can see branches added, students added, all student, and everything is there. Now just go to the table and see, is there any students in the database? Yes, one student is there. And any branch information is there? Yes, two branch information is there. That's fine. So I will show you, right? Currently, I'm not explaining any code, how I'm performing the CRUD operation. Everything I'm going to discuss in some time. Now, so now, if you look at the context object, right? If you look at the EF core DB class, do you think that hard coding connection string directly within our application code is a good programming practice? Yes or no?
Yes.
No,
Why
sir.
no? No. Because of the security concerns. Right? Hardcoding the connection string may contain some sensitive information like the username and password, which we do not want to expose in our code. Limited functionality, limited functionality or flexibility means that if the connection string changes, that is a different server, right? Different server in production and or during testing, right? So basically, what we need to do, we need to remodify and we need to do a redeployment. For example, right? For example, if you are environment specific databases are there. And for each environment, right, you need a different connection string. And for each environment, right, you need to go to the application code, you need to modify the connection string, and you need to redeploy again and again, which is going to be time consuming and error prone. Why error prone? Because, right, for example, sometimes what happens, like you provided the, what I can say, connection string of your development environment and you publish the code to the production, then what will happen? So this is going to be error prone. So these things, if you want to avoid, then you should not hard code the connection string within your application code. And what is the best option, right? So there are multiple options. You can store the connection string right in secret manager. You can store them in the environment variable. But for now, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to store the connection string in app_settings.json file. But if you look at the project, right, if you write app settings, right, if you are working with the ASP.NET applications, right, for example, ASP.NET framework applications, if there is a console and Windows application, you will see app config file. If it is a web application, right, then you will see web config file. But in the .NET Core console application, right, you do not have such files. In .NET Core applications, we do not have app config or web config. Even we do not have by default that app settings.json file, which is available in web applications. If you remember, whenever we are developing ASP.NET Core web application, at that time we are having that app settings.json file, app settings.environment specific JSON file, right? But for console application, by default, there is no such app settings.json file available. So what we need to do, we need to add this app Sagar, who is Sagar, please do not do anything in the right screen. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to add the app settings.json file into a console application, how to store the connection string in the console application, and how to read the connection string from the right console application and use it within our DbContext class. So if you want to add a JSON file, first of all, what I need to do is I need to add this package. Without this package, right, it is not possible to read the data from the connection string. So first of all, what I need to do, I need to install this package, right? So let me go ahead and install this package, which is required for right working with the JSON file in a console application. So go to package manager console, right? Again, clean this one. So this is my right statement which is going to install the Microsoft extension .configuration.json file because I want to read the data from the configuration file. So for this purpose, I need to install this right Microsoft extension.configuration.json file. Clear, guys? Which file right which package you need to install if you want to work with the configurations like app settings.json, right, or right, basically here you can consider this as a app settings.json file, but this file name you can give anything. Consider this as a JSON file rather than thinking about app settings.json file. So if you want to create a JSON file and if you want to read the data from the JSON file in a console application, right, which is developed using .NET Core, then you need to install this package. Clear? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right now.
Yes, sir.
Right now, I can create a JSON file, right? So this JSON file, you can give it any name. You can give this JSON file any name. Suppose my settings, my app settings, XYZ, ABC, whatever name you want to give, you can. Generally, as per the industry standard, any configuration data what we want to store, right? We need to give that file name as app settings.json. This is a industry standard. So let us proceed and see how we can add the connection, right? App settings.json file. Right click on your project, click on add new item. So right click on your project and here you will select add new item. So once you click on this one, here it will open add new item window, search for JSON. So search for JSON, right? And here you will see this JavaScript JSON file is there. So this JavaScript JSON configuration file is there, and that file I need to select, and I need to provide the name as app_settings.json and click on the OK button. So once I click on the OK button, whatever code is there, okay, just forgot. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide my code. So here you can see I have created a section called a connection string. Okay, let me remove these things. Right, so here you can see I have created a section called Right here, I have what is this? Okay, so I have created a section called connection string. Then here I have created a key with the name SQL Server connection, and here I have provided the database, right, using which I need to communicate. So this is the same database, right? If you are getting confused, so what is the best option? Just copy this connection string from here and pass to this one. Right? So that is what you need to pass here. So this is my connection string, what I have specified. Now what I need to do is now I need to read the connection string from this key, and I want to use that connection string in use SQL Server method. Clear? Up to this, it is clear? Yes or
Yes,
no?
sir.
Right. So loading the
Yes, sir.
connection string, right? It is a four-step process. Let us proceed and understand the step by step, right? How we can do this, right? So first of all, right, right, what I can do is let me remove this comment statement, which is making very right confusion, right? So first of all, we need to load the connection string, right? I mean, first of all, we need to load the JSON file. So to load the JSON file which we have created, so what I have done here, I have created a new configuration builder object, and to this configuration builder object, whatever the name you provided, app settings.json, if you are getting my app settings.json, right, only settings.json, right, whatever name you provided to your JSON file, that file
Sir,
name you
your
need to
voice
pass.
is breakable, sir.
Guys, my voice is breaking.
Now it's just for 1 second. It's okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's middle keep going down.
Then
Your
might be
voice is
because
going low, coming up, going low and coming up, sir.
even my internet is very high. Okay, let me change.
No, it's okay, sir, but sometimes it is.
Okay, might be because of the internet issues, right? Okay. So now you can say, right? So first statement is load the configuration file. So whatever your configuration file, whatever name you provided, that name you need to provide here. App settings, my app settings, whatever. So first of all, you need to load the configuration file. So once you load the configuration file, then you need to go to the section, right, which contains the connection string. So in this case, what is the section name? The section name is a connection string. So using this config builder, I go to the section which contains the connection string. So config builder dot get section, and in this case, this is nothing but your section. That section I am passing here so that I can go to the config section. So once I go to the config section, then using the config section, I can access this right key. That is what I am doing in the third step, right? So once I go to the config section using the string indexer, I need to pass the key name, whatever name I provided here, that what I'm passing. If this key is available, it will store that value, otherwise it is going to store now. And after that, what I need to do, so once you get the value of this key, you can pass that value to this SQL Server method. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right, so this is first of all you need to load the configuration file, then go to the section which contains the configuration key. Once you go to the section, then access the value right based on the key. And once you get the value, then what you need to do now, you need to pass that value to this SQL Server method. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So once this is done, now let us check, right, whether we are able to access the application or not, right? So we are not doing any changes to our model and entities, right? So we are just changing this connection string, so migration is not required. So what I'm doing here, right, I'm just calling this get all context method to show all the students' data, right? So now I'm running the application and see whether it is working fine or not. So here you can see one error message is coming. The configuration file app settings.json was not found and it is not optional. The expected physical path is D training SP.NET Core, whatever, And in the bin debug in .NET 8.0, this app settings.json file is not available. So for example, now if you go to this location, bin debug and 8.0, inside this folder, there is no app settings.json file. That is the reason why while running the application, it is a mandatory file. So basically what exactly it means, after we build the project or after we, right, either you run the application in debug mode or release mode, right? So it is going to read the data from the app settings.json file, but at runtime, this file is not available at the specified location. Getting my point? So until and unless the files that app settings.file is not available at this location, I cannot access the connection string. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right now what I need to do is I need to
Sir,
make
what
sure.
is debug mode and release mode?
Sorry.
What is debug mode and release mode?
So that is right. I'm not right. So what is debug mode and release mode? Right. It is not the time to discuss this basic right concept. Right. Right. This is not the ideal time to discuss right this right C# basic concept. Just to try right Google and write anything. Right. Here you can see debug and the release mode. So just do it by yourself, right? If you are unable to figure out what is the difference between debug mode and release mode, please ping me in Telegram. I mean in the group, and I will discuss because I don't want right other people to right to waste. Right, I mean whatever time I'm going to explain related to debug and release mode, it is a waste of time for them because this is not related to ASP.NET Core. This is very basic, right? Concept. So here what I need to do is I need to make sure this app settings.json file should be there inside this .NET 8.0 folder. Once I build the application, either right or once I run the application, either using debug mode and the release mode. So how we can do this? So right click on this file, right click on app settings.json file, click on this properties for option. Right. So once you click on this properties option, right. So here you can see copy to output directory. So do not copy. So instead do not copy, you need to select this copy always. So copy to output directory means once you run the application, this file will be copied to the output directory means to this directory. So once it copy to this directory, right, then only the application can access the data from this configuration file. So now with these changes, run the application and see whether we are getting the data. Now you can see we are getting the data. Now, if you come to this place, right? Now you can see the app settings.json file is available. Clear, guys?
So you have to copy the access into the output directory in order to access it.
Yes. Until and unless, right? So by
Yeah,
default,
yeah.
right, it is not right. Do not copy option. So we need to make sure to copy always. Copy always means whether you are running the application in debug mode or release mode, or if you are publishing the application, always this file is going to be available in the right output directory. So once this file is available, then at runtime, right, the application is going to read the data from that right file. Clear?
Yeah, but supposing the app setting is there by default, like in web, so
See,
it will be copied.
if you are developing a ASP.NET Core web application, by default that output it is set to write copy always in case of a web application. But here we
Okay.
are adding this
Okay.
file. So
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
file name can give you anything. Right? We are adding this file, so we need to manually set this to write the copy to output directory, and we need to set the option copy always. Clear?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Yes, sir.
So this is fine. Now we have discussed right how to load the connection string inside app settings.json file, and from there how to read the connection string. So guys, remember whenever I'm going to use right ASP.NET Core MVC application and Web API application, at that time I'm going to very frequently going to use app settings.json file. From there I'm going to read the connection string. But in this session, whenever I'm going to develop the console application, at that time mostly I'm going to use the hard-coded connection string. That for easy understanding, because I don't want to keep focus on the connection string part rather than the right, what I can say, concept, right? So, but I have shown you both the options. You can hard code the connection string, as well as you can store the connection string in the offsetting start JSON file, any JSON file, and from there you can read the data. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. So now what I'm going
Can
to
you
do is,
scroll up? Can you scroll up a bit here in DB context class? First line, this configuration builder instance you are building, that is coming from where actually? Line
coming
number
from
12.
coming from means it is a class that what I'm using here. It is a system provided class. And to use this system provided class, right, I have already installed one package from the beginning, right?
Okay, okay.
So if you remember from the beginning only, I have installed one package.
Yeah, got
That
okay. In
extension,
this,
that configuration. So
okay,
inside this configuration package, this is a class file is there, and we need to create an instance of this class if I want to read the data from this JSON file.
okay.
Clear?
Yeah, I got it.
So next, what I'm going to discuss, guys, I'm going to discuss, right, how to perform the CRUD operation, right? Because in this example, I have written, read some statement, right? But I have not explained those statements. Now let us proceed and try to understand, right, how to perform the database CRUD operations using entity framework code. So CRUD operation means basically it stands for 4 different types of operation. One is for creating, or you can say inserting data into the database table. Another one is for retrieving the data from the database table, that is read operation. Another one is you are having one existing data, or you can say entity, or you can say record in the database. Some of the properties or all the properties, right, you want to update. And another one is delete operation, means existing entities there, and we want to delete that existing entity from the database. So basically, these four operations, right, combined together, right, termed as CRUD operations in our right applications, right. So basically, these are the four operations. Let us proceed and understand how we can perform. But before performing this CRUD operation, let us try to understand, right, some basic information about the connected and the disconnected scenario. Right, so this is not only available in ASP.NET, right, in .NET Core, it is also available in your right entity framework applications, right? So can anybody tell me what is the difference between right connected and disconnected scenarios?
Uh, so connected would be like where we are live connected to the database, and disconnected would be like we will be getting a kind of a snapshot of the database, and we'll be making changes to that, and after doing those changes, that would be applied to the main like the database.
So anything else? Anyone having any more idea? So guys, tell me, who is responsible for performing the database CRUD operation? Till now, whatever we have discussed, which class is responsible for doing the database operations? Student class, branch class, or this is EF core DB context class?
DB
Someone take
context.
DB context.
right? So this class, right? So let assume this is DB context class. So this DB context class is responsible for doing the database operation. If this DB context class is alone responsible for retrieving the data from the database, is alone responsible for updating the data into the database, then this is nothing but your connected scenario. Connected scenario means how many DB contexts? Only one DB context class that is going to do the operations. Clear? So this DB context, right? I'm going to show you, right, how to perform this thing. So this DB context is responsible for doing all the operations. He is responsible for retrieving the data from the database. He is responsible for modifying the data. He is only responsible for updating the data back to the database. In this connected in the environment, right? So one DB context retrieve the data. one DbContext retrieves the data, and actually some of the keys are not working. So another DbContext is for, right? Another DbContext update the data. So basically, in this case, right, one DbContext going to retrieve the data, another DbContext is going to update the data. So basically, how many DbContext are you using here? More than one. So if more than one DbContext are there, so this is nothing but disconnected scenario. For example, right? For example, you are developing one project, right? So in that project, right, what is there, right? You develop one web service. Those who are having some idea, they will understand this concept. Otherwise, I'm going to discuss this thing in our coming session, right? So you develop one API, get the student API. That get student API going to retrieve the data from the database, and this data it return to the client. That means one DbContext is used to retrieve the data from the database. Now, the client again do some modification, and then again that modified data, the client send back to our server. And now our server is going to use another DbContext to update the data. So this scenario is nothing but your disconnected scenario. But if the same DbContext is responsible for retrieving the data, Sagar, what is this here? So I'm saying again and again, please don't put any message in the chat window. Why you are putting the message? I generally, right, I have told this many times, don't put anything on the chat window. Then why again and again you are putting the message on the chat window? Anytime, any question, you can ask, I will give you enough time, right? So don't put anything on the window. So basically, in the case of a connected scenario, the only one DbContext is responsible for doing all the operation. In disconnected scenario, one DbContext to do some part, another DbContext is going to do the other part of the operation, right? So now let us keep focus on this connected scenario. This connected scenario we'll discuss in our coming session. Clear, guys?
Sir.
Okay, now, before proceeding further at how to perform the context object, right, we need to understand these things. So this entity, right, you can consider this entity is nothing but one object, student object, employee object, branch object, right, any object. And each entity, whenever it is tracked by the DbContext, right? So basically this DbContext, whenever it is tracking any entity, what do you mean by tracking means? He know what is happening with that entity. I will discuss what do you mean by tracking, how it is happening behind the scene practically, right? So each entity, right, can be any of the 5 states. What are the state currently I'm showing here? Added, modified, deleted. Apart from this three, there are two other states. One is detached and another one is read unchanged. What is detached? What is unchanged? I will show you. Entity life cycle. I'm going to discuss entity state life cycle. At that time, you will get clarity. So basically, this entity one, entity two, entity three, you can consider this. These are nothing but one data. So one student record, which state is added. What is entity state? How it is being added? I will show you practically. Another entity whose state is modified, another entity whose state is deleted. So all these three entities, let's assume it is being tracked by the DbContext class. So once it is tracked by the DbContext class, so whenever I call the step changes method, right? So there is a method called step changes, which is provided by this DbContext class. If I call the step changes method, then what exactly the entity from our code is going to do is, so the entities which are there in added state, it is going to generate the insert SQL statement, and that insert statement is going to execute in the database. Entities which are there in modified state, which is being tracked by the DbContext object, those entities are, for those entities, the framework is going to generate update statement that is going to be executed in the database. Similarly, those entities which are marked as deleted, right, the entity in deleted state, for them, it is going to generate a delete SQL statement and that is going to execute in the database. Clear? So basically, if the entity is in added state, I will show you when the entity is going to be in added state, when it is going to be in modified state, when it is going to be in deleted state. I will show you practically. But for now, just remember, if the entity is in added state, insert statement, modified state, update statement, deleted state, it is going to generate delete SQL statement, which is going to execute in the backend database. Other two states which I have mentioned, unchanged and detached, for them, the context object is not going to generate any kind of a SQL statement. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. So let us see. So to make you understand, right, whether it is generating the insert statement, update statement, or delete statement, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable entity framework core logging. So what do you mean by entity framework core logging? Entity framework core logging means it is going to give you the information what internally happening behind the scene. When the connection is established, what SQL statement is generated and executed by the framework, whether it is right doing some kind of a transactions, right? If you want to see all these things, right, what is happening behind the scene, then for that purpose, right, what we need to do, we need to enable entity framework logging. So why it is important? So understanding the query, what is generated by entity framework core is very, very important. Why? Because if you want to verify, right, why it is taking more time, why the SQL statement taking more time, right, without verifying the SQL statement itself, you cannot identify if there is any issue with the statement, why I'm not getting the data as expected. If you want to troubleshoot or if you want to debug, then what you need? You need to check the generated SQL statement. So how you can verify how you can see this thing? If you enable entity framework or logging. For example, if something is taking more time, right, you are executing one statement and you are saying, right, you want to verify why it is taking. There is a very famous problem called N1, N plus 1 query problem, right? Means one, for a single query, it is sending N plus N, right, N plus 1 number of queries, right? What is N plus 1 query problem? I will show you practically. Right. So basically, right, unnecessarily, right, it is sending again and right multiple database, right? For retrieving the data, it is sending more number of requests to the database. That means more number of round trips between our database and our application. So how we can overcome this thing, right? For example, if someone new to entity framework core and if they know how exactly the entity framework, right, handling the things behind the scene, right? How it is maintaining the entity state, how it is maintaining the relationship, how it is handling the transactions, when it is generating the link queue inner join, when it is generating the link queue out, right? Left join, right? How? If you want to see all these things, right? What is happening behind the scene, then for that purpose, what you need to enable entity framework core logging. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. And guys, remember, enabling entity framework core logging is very simple. Let us proceed and see how we can do this, right? So for this purpose, right, so what I'm going to do, I'm just replacing these things, right? So I don't want to put anything, right, more statement in this case. So this is my right general statement, right? What you can see, where I'm providing the hard-coded connection string, and that is fine, right? So to enable entity framework core logging, so what you need to do, you need to use this option builder on instance, and this option builder instance provide one method called log2, right? And to this method, right, what we need to do, we need to pass two parameters. So two parameters means what kind of a log label you want to use. For example, I want to use, right, a log label dot. Here you can see debug information warning critical error, right? All these things we will discuss in detail, right? For now, let's put it information. And the second option is where you want to log the data, whether to a text file, whether to a right database, or whether to the console window. Let me go to the console window. So what I'm doing here, console dot write line. So in the console window, it is going to log the data. So why I'm getting this error? So what is the issue? Okay. So I just write, I mean, everything is fine. We just provide the right parameter in a wrong order. So in this case, it is going to write the log information into the console window. Anything above information, if I'm providing information means if you go to this definition, you will see there are a different kind of log labels. So we'll discuss what is trace, what is debug, what is information, warning, error, critical. All these things we are going to discuss. But remember, if I'm providing information means information plus warning plus error plus critical, this information it is going to display. If I'm putting trace means trace plus debug plus everything is going to be displayed. If I'm putting warning means warning, error and critical. If non means no log is going to be enabled, right? So whatever log message label I specified, that log message label plus the higher log message label are going to be displayed, right? But if you specify non means logging is not enabled, logging is disabled, right? So in this case, information and higher log label are going to be displayed in the console window. Clear? So this is for enabling EFA4 logging. Clear? Clear or not?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. It's good.
This is what we have enabled the entity framework for logging. So before proceeding further, right, I'm going to show you, right, everything from the scratch, right? So what I'm going to do, I just go ahead and I just truncate the table, right? Remember, in this case, I can truncate the students table, but I cannot truncate the branches table, right? For example, I go ahead and execute this statement, so it is fine. But if I'm going to truncate the branches table, then it will give me some error. What error? Cannot truncatable package the branches because it is being referenced by a foreign key constant. So what exactly it means? It means this branch table, it acts as a primary key table, and this branch table is referred by the students table. So whenever a table contains some data which is going to be referenced by a foreign key from other table, then that primary key table data you cannot delete. I mean, you cannot truncate. Yes, you can delete, but you cannot truncate. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to delete all the data from this table. So for this one, I'm deleting this now. Now, once I delete the data, right, then what will happen? See, truncate means it is going to reset the identity column. Do you think that delete statement is going to reset the identity column values?
No.
Yes or no?
No.
So here again, if I'm going to insert new data, it is going to start from 1. But here it is going to start from 3. Why? Because we have already inserted 2 data, 1, 2. And here we are not truncating, we are deleting. Deleting means next record it is going to insert at location 3. But I don't want that. I want to reset the identity from for these branches. So for that purpose, right, I need to use this DbCC check identity command. So DbCC check identity, you have to provide the fully qualified table name. Means you can see dbo.branches and it is belongs to EFA core DB database, EFA core DB dbo.branches, reset and 0. 0 means it is going to start from 1. So just to execute this, yes, DbCC command is executed. So, right, so basically we are making our application ready. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to perform the CRUD operation. First of all, let us try to understand the create operation, right? So for performing the create operation, right, entity framework core provided us 2 method, right, one method called add. So this add method you can use from the DbSet right class, DbSet of T class, right? So DbSet of T entity class you can use. Otherwise, you can also make use of the add method of the DbContext class. So there are two. This add method it is available in 2 classes. One is DbSet, another one is DbContext class. So both are possible. So both of this option I'm going to discuss, right? So basically, if you want to add a new entity to the database, then what you need to do? See, I'm not talking about the bulk operation. Bulk operation add range method is there, which we will discuss in our coming session. Currently, we are discussing about entering right, a single entity. I want to insert a single data or single record to the database. So for that purpose, what I need to do is I need to use add method, and that add method you can make use from the right DbSet class or from the DbContext class. So what is the difference between these two? So in DbSet class, you have to specify what type of data, right? For example, if I'm using the students.R. So if I'm using students.R, then you have to specify only student entity. But at the same time, if I'm using EF core DbContext.Add, at that time I can specify student or brand. Anything is fine. So based on the type of data, automatically, right, it is going to infer what should be the table, and accordingly it is going to insert. So I'm going to show you both of these options, right? So how you can make use of both of this method. Let us try to understand. So now we need to understand the statement by statement code, right? Whatever we are writing, we need to understand very clearly. So first of all, if you are going to work with the entity framework core to perform the CRUD operation, then this is the class which is coming into the picture, EFA core DbContext. So first of all, what I need to do, I need to create an instance of this entity framework core DbContext class, and that is what I'm doing here. So I'm writing this inside a using statement, so that whenever this statement, whenever it goes out from this open and close block, right, automatically, that instance what it is created here, that is going to be disposed. So that is the advantages of using block. So inside this using block, first of all, what I'm doing here, I'm creating an instance of EF core DbContext. So this is the instance. So this class instance I have created. So once I created this class instance, then can I access the students properties and branches properties using this instance? Yes or no? So
Yes.
if I create
Yes,
an
yes.
instance of this class, so I can access these things under this thing.
Yes.
Why? Because these are public properties, and the public properties means using the instance, I can access them from anywhere. So now let us see. So first of all, what I want to do is I want to create some branch. So for creating the branch, what I need to do, I need to create an instance of this branch, and whatever property are mandatory, optional, right? Whatever value you want to provide, mandatory means you should have to provide the value. Optional means it is up to you. And this branch ID, it is going to my identity column, which is going to be generated by the system, right? So in this case, what I'm doing, I'm creating one CSV branch. You can see I'm only providing the branch name, description, phone number, and email ID. Similarly, this is my another branch, electrical branch. So branch name, description, phone number, and email ID I have provided. So basically, I created two instances. Now, as I already told you, right, there are two methods that what I can use, right? So let me go ahead and show you both the options. So in this case, you can see I'm using CSV branch, and here this add method I'm calling on the branches property. So context, right? Context means this is context object. So using this context object, whatever public properties are there, I can access them, like context.student, context.branches. Yes, these are public properties, so I can access them. So and then I can call the add method here. And when I call the add method, this is nothing but DbSet.Add method. Why I'm saying DbSet.Add method? If you go to the definition of this one, so the type is DbSet. So in this case, this is DbSet.Add method. And here I can only pass, right? Here I can only pass, right? As this add method belongs to DbSet of T, and here T is branch. So to this add method, I can only pass entities which are of type branch. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, similarly, right, other option is there. Right now, you can see I can also add something like this. Right. So here I'm calling this add method, and here you can only pass the entity which are a type branch. But now I'm calling this add method on the DbSet on instance. So now you can see this add method I'm calling over the DbContext.Add method, and here also I'm passing one entity electrical branch. Now, what is the type of entity branch? So automatically he will handle the things behind the scene, and it's adding this entity to this what I can say branches collection, that is going to be taken care by this add method. So using this context.add method, I can pass entity of any type. If I'm using the add method which belongs to the context object, I can pass the entity of any type, and at runtime the framework will identify where I need to add this entity. But if I'm using a DbSet.Add method, then this DbSet property T, whatever type it specify, that type of data I can pass. For example, using this add method, I can pass one student entity. I can pass the branch entity. It is going to work as expected. But if I'm using context.branches.add, so in this case, only entity which are of type branch that I can pass. I cannot pass the student entity here. Why? Because it is specified DbSet of branch. DbSet of branch means what? I can only pass the branch entity here. But here it is not specifying any type. Directly we are calling this add method on the context object. So I can pass student, I can pass right what I can say branch. Both are going to be work fine. At runtime, he will add this property to the respective property in the DbContext class. Now, the student entity I'm creating here, while creating the student entity, I'm also specifying the student belongs to which branch. And that branch entity here you can see CSC branch, electrical branch. So accordingly, that branch ID column which is there in the students table, that branch ID, whatever branch ID it assigned for this CSC branch, that branch it is going to store here. Similarly, students too, it is belongs to electrical branch. Whatever all other information we are also providing. And finally, what I'm doing here, student dot add method. Here also you can remove this thing, right? The context dot add. Now you can see this is context dot add. Here I'm passing student object. It is working. Here context dot add. I'm passing right branch entity. It is working. Why? Because this is the context object. He know right what type of entity it is and where I need to add. But here branches means I can only add branch. For example, this is my electrical branch. Now to this student.add method, if I pass this electrical method, it will not work. Why? Because this student entity, what is the type? DbSet of student. DbSet of student means only student object I can pass here. Other object I cannot pass here. If you try to pass, you will get compile time error. Clear or not?
So
Yes.
it makes actually one can conclude that it makes more sense to use it directly with add instead of using the DB
No, no,
context.
no. This
Yeah.
will make you
On
confused. So for example, if you by mistake create a different type of object, then it will make confusion. Ideally, this will give you more sense because here explicitly
okay.
we are specifying that we are going to add the entity to the student collection. Here, you will not get that clarity. So which entity is this?
Yeah, okay, okay. Okay.
Right? Clarity you will get here, not here. Here you can add any entity type, right? For example, by mistake you create a different entity and add that. What will happen? You will not get any issue. But here,
Sure, sure.
that clarity you will get. If you are trying to add something different, you will get compile time error. So in this case, guys, remember, whenever I add the student, right? In this case, so this student, it is CSC branch, what you created, that is CSC branch entity is going to be added to the context object. So this CSC branch is added to the, right, to the, guys, tell me, to the, which object?
Context object.
Context
Context
object.
object. And this is added to the context object, right? But in this case, it will add it to the context object with added state. What is the entity state? What is the state of this entity? Added. Clear? So whenever you use the add method to add an entity, that added state is that entity state is going to be added. I will show you right in our next right the next concept what I'm going to discuss. I'm going to discuss entity state. At that time you will get more clarity. Now, right, forget about this thing. So in this case, you just remember if I'm using the add method to add any entity to the context object, then those entities are going to be added to the context object with the added state. Clear? And for added state, right, guys, remember, until and unless I'm not calling this step changes method, these are not going to be stored into the database. So here it is only added to the context object, but not to the database. So when it is going to add to the database, when I call the step changes method. So when I call the step changes method, it will establish the connection to the database. It is based on the entity state, it is going to generate the appropriate SQL statement. And in this case, all these four entities are going to be right added to the database. So in this case, four SQL statement are going to be generated and inserted into the database, right? So let me run the application, and even right, we have also enabled the database logging, right? So you can also verify the generated SQL statement, right? So let me run the application and see whether it is right. See, you can see it is using SQL mod statement to insert the data, and here also it is using SQL mod statement to insert the data. So why it is using SQL mod statement? Because we are having two insert statements. Two insert statement means to improve the performance, right? It is making use of a SQL mod statement. If you know SQL mod statement, that is fine. Otherwise, just go ahead and learn what is SQL mod statement. How SQL mod statement, right? Or right, the data into the database. In this case, it is making use of a SQL mod statement to insert the data. Clear?
Sir, I can't
Yes,
hear
sir.
you.
Please, can you repeat? We can't hear you.
Your voice is not.
Guys, my voice is not audible.
Now it's also audible. Now.
In between it
Sometimes
got.
audible, sometimes not, sir.
Okay. So is that clear, right? So in this case, it is generating some insert SQL statement, I mean SQL mod statement to add the student and the branch to the database. Now, if you verify the branch table, then you will see two data is there, and if you verify the student table, then also see there are two students. Clear?
Yeah, but the screen you showed before this one was not clear when you were explaining it. The screen before this one, yeah.
So this screen means here it is making use of a right, a SQL mod statement. Do you know what is the SQL mod statement? I'm asking
Yeah,
you
it
this
does.
question.
Yes,
Do you
yes.
have right? So basically, in this case, what exactly SQL mod statement is going to do? It is going to check the data in the database. If it is available, it is going to update the properties. If not available, it is going to insert those properties, right? So this is how it is going to improve the performance, right? So means what means in this case, right? We can send multiple SQL statement using a single right round trip from our application to the database. All the insert statement it is going to send using a single database round trip using the SQL mod. So in this case, this mod statement, whatever it is using here, right, it is using means what both the two. So basically, in this case, right, we are having two, what I can say, two students, two branches to be inserted and two students to be inserted. As there are two statements, so it is using this. Okay, so let me do one more thing, right? Let me remove one more statement from here. And let me also okay, so we have only one statement, right? One insert statement and right, one student we are inserting and one branch we are inserting, right? So now let me run the application. So in this case, you can see, right, as a single statement, it is using a single insert statement or not for inserting the branch. Similarly, it is using a single insert statement for inserting the student. Is that clear now?
Yep.
Yes, so this is the SQL statement what internally entity framework is generating and executing on the database. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
And here P0, P1, P2, P3, these are nothing but your parameter. P0 for branch name, P1 for description, P2 for right email, phone number. The actual value it is not displaying here because of the security reason, but this is how it is going to store the data. Now, so this is how it is generating the insert SQL statement. You can also verify the data. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Right. Now, what we need to do, we need to understand the update operation. So, update operation means what? We want to modify some or all the properties of a record. Right. So, first of all, what I need to do is we need to retrieve the data from the database. We need to modify the properties with the updated data which we want to update. And then once we update the entities, then we will right, send the changes back to the database. So let us proceed and understand this thing, right? So, and in this case, guys, remember, we do not need to do anything special for the update operation, right? Automatically, the things are going to be handled by entity framework code, right? For example, you can see currently in our database, right, there are few students. So how many students? Student ID 1, 2, and 3. So 3 students are there. So first of all, I need to create an instance of a context object. And here within this a context dot student. So guys, remember there are two statements. So if I'm writing, right, if I'm writing context dot students, right, so to list or okay, so context dot students. So what exactly it means? It means, right, select a star from students. So this statement context dot student means it is very similar to your select a star from student. Select a star from student means what? Selecting all the columns and all the records from the database. So this is nothing but your select a star from students. Now, so context dot students dot find means what? Now here it is applying the where clause condition. So where, right, student ID equals to whatever the value you pass. So this where student ID equals to what I have provided here, this is going to be done by this find method. If you are not using find method, you can make use of right other options as well. Like right, for example, I can make use of some different mechanism also. Right, for example, I can make use of a hyper default method. Right, so here I can specify std such that std dot student id equals to 1. That what I can specify. Here also I can make use of where clause conditions. So instead of this, right, what I can do is I can also specify where this and then I can apply faster default. So this is what it is possible, right? So many options are there. Whichever options you like, that what you can use, right? But whenever we are working with the entity framework core, if you want to filter the data based on the primary key, so this find method is only going to work whenever you are filtering the data based on the primary key, and that primary key value we need to pass to this find method. Any other cases, this is not going to work. Any other cases, you can go with this approach, which is performance optimized, and you should not use this approach. Right? This is very bad from the performance point of view, right? People are using this one, first applying the where condition, then applying the faster default. This is very dangerous. And this is performance optimized faster default method. And if you are filtering the data based on the primary key, you should use this one. And why I'm saying this one is better, I will show you later. Right? Why better? I will show you later. Means what? First level of caching is provided by entity framework core. How the caching is implemented, what benefit we are getting, right? That what it is going to tell. You will get if you are using this find method, right? So in this case, right, I'm showing you multiple options. Whichever option is best, that is also I'm showing here. So this is the option you need to use if you are filtering the data based on the primary key. If you are not filtering the data based on the primary key, some other properties based on which you are filtering the data, you need to use these first options. Clear, guys?
But sir, find method, how it will identify one is only primary key? It can be branch ID also, no sir?
So on which property I'm accessing this one?
It's a student.
So in this case, if I'm writing select star from student, do you think that
But it's
will it fetch the data from the branches table?
no, but there is a reference key
You are
also
calling,
can be.
so you are calling this method on which property of the context object? Students property. So am I calling this method on the branches property? If I'm calling on the branches property, it is going to be branch ID. If I'm calling on the students
Okay.
property, it is going to be student ID. In the students
Okay.
table, or you can student entity, branch ID is the primary key or student ID is the primary key?
Student ID. Student
So definitely in this case, it is going to be the student ID. Branch ID will not come into the picture. If I'm calling
ID. Okay.
context dot branches, right? For example, if I'm calling branches, then in that case, it is going to be the branch ID.
Okay. Got it.
right? So in this case, it is student means find method is always going to find the data. You can say, right, the entity, the value of the primary key or the entity to be found. So whatever entity, right, based on the primary key, if you want to find that entity, then you have to use this find method. Otherwise, other than primary key, you can go with the faster default method, but you should not use this approach, which is very dangerous from the performance point of view. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, right, okay, let me do one more thing, right? I'm also fetching another, right? I'm also applying another object, right? I'm selecting the data one more time, and I'm also finding the data another time, right? Student one and the student two, just for the demonstration purpose, right? So now what I'm doing here, I'm checking whether the student is available or not. If this primary key, if it is available, then data will be written, otherwise it is going to be null. So if it is null, then I have to give this message, no student found to update. If it is not null, that means the data is available. So if the data is available, then what I need to do, I need to update the data. First of all, before doing the update operation, I'm displaying what is the first name, last name, and the email ID of the students. I'm updating the first name property with some updated value, last name with some updated value, email with some updated value, changing the first name, changing the last name, changing the email, right? For the student ID 1, right? So for the student ID 1, what is the first name from that? Okay, let me do one more thing. So I'm not updating to something different. I'm keeping the first name as it is. So I'm only updating the, right, what I can say, last name and what I can say email ID. I'm providing a value for the first name property, but this value what I'm providing, that is already available in the database, same value. And here, ideally, you can see this value is not a different value which is there in the database, but this last name and email ID, that is what I'm updating. So now you can see I'm calling the set changes method, and after the set changes method, again, I'm displaying the data. So in this case, what will happen? Now, whenever I retrieve the data from the database, it is going to be there in unchanged state. It is going to be there in unchanged state. Unchanged state means what? Now, whatever the data the student object is holding, the same data is there in the database or not. So at this point of time, in line number 17, so the data what the student object is holding, is this the same data that is available in the database or different data?
Same.
Same. So whenever the data is same within the context object as well as the same in the database, means there is no differences in the data. So in that case, the entity state, the student entity state, right, or you can say student, right, entity state is going to be unchanged. Clear? Yes or no? What do you mean by unchanged entity state? Is that clear?
Yep.
Unchanged entity state means the data, whatever we are having within this context object, and whatever the data in the database, if both are same for the entity, then we can say that entity state is unchanged. Everybody clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now in this case, right, when I'm updating this data, student data first name, forget about line number 34 and 35. In this case, whenever I'm providing this entity state value to from here, so at that time we are updating the first name. So whenever we are providing a value which is the same as the database, so in this case, the entity state will not be changed. At this point, right? At this point, the entity state still it is in unchanged state. Entity state still it is going to be in unchanged state. So how it is managing? So to understand the things what is happening behind the scene. So when it retrieve the data from the database, so what it will do, it will create a snapshot of the original data. Snapshot of the original data. So framework will store the snapshot of the original data internally. Store a snapshot of the original data internally. Internally means whatever data you retrieve from the database, it is going to be stored in the students table. Also, it is going to create a snapshot. So if you are not understanding what do you mean by snapshot, you can consider this is a Xerox of the student object. Clear? Clear or not? What do you mean by snapshot? Snapshot means whatever the data it is storing on the student object, it will create a Xerox of the student object with the original data, what it retrieved from the database. Clear?
Yeah, there's an image of it. Yeah.
So now whenever I'm updating the student entity first name property to Pranay, so it is going to check whatever the student first name is the same as the snapshot entity what it is storing the first name property value. So in the snapshot, what is the first name? Inside this snapshot, what is the first name? The first name is still there in the value for the first name property is going to be Pranay or a different value. So this is the
Same
original
value.
data. Original data means this data or not? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yep.
So this is the original data or not?
Yes.
Clear? So this is the original data. So this original data, what is there in the snapshot, right? And this property name, whatever we have provided here, is this value what I am storing in the student entity is the same in the snapshot?
Yeah.
Yes.
Same or different?
Same.
Same.
So if same, then it will not modify the entity state. Whatever the entity state, it will keep the same entity state. So at this point of
Unchanged.
time, so state is on-chain, so here it is going to be on-chain. Now I'm modifying the last name. Last name value is going to be Mohanty. So what is the value for the last name in the snapshot?
Route.
Route.
Is this value same or a different value?
Different value.
So when there is a difference in the value, right, the entity state
So here entity state will be
Okay.
changed.
will modify it. So you have modified, na? So the entity state is going to be modified. The student entity state is going to be modified. Why modified? Because the student entity last name value, now it is not the same as the last name value of the snapshot. Clear? If there is a difference in the data, means the entity state is going to be modified. Clear?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And again, as the entity state is already modified, so in this case also, right, it will keep the same entity state as modified, right? Here also, it will write keeping the entity state as modified. Clear? But in this case, now you can see whatever the email value in the snapshot and this email value in the student object, they are going to be same or they are a difference?
Different.
So
Modified.
that means first name value it is same, but last name and email this is going to be different. So now, so when I call the step changes method, then what will happen? So as what is the current entity state?
Modified.
Modified. So for the modified entity state, what the SQL server is going to do, it is going to generate update
Update
SQL,
statement.
right? So update SQL statement it is going to generate. But now in the update SQL statement, it is going to include first name, last name, email, or only last name and email, or all the
Or
properties, right?
modified.
Whatever they are in the database based on the see, whenever I'm using, so definitely it is going to update the data based on the primary key that is ID, student ID. So apart from the student ID, in the update statement, it is going to include first name, last name, date of birth, gender, email, all these properties it is going to include, or it is going to include first name, last name, and email, or it is going to include last name or email. Which is appropriate as per your understanding? What value I need to update?
Last name
The
and emails are
modified
modified.
ones.
Rest of all remaining same.
Exactly, right?
Modified
So
ones should be.
if you want to achieve the best performance, then what you need? So for best performance, I only need to send this update statement, which is going to update the last name and the email. Other properties which are not affected, And why I'm going to include them in the update statement? Does it make sense? Does it make sense to include this first name? Does it make sense to include the right gender and the phone number? No. Why? Because they are not modified. They're still same. What is there in the database? It's same. Then no need to include them in the update SQL statement. So now the update statement, what is going to generated by entity framework core? It is going to include only the last name and the email column, and it is going to update the data based on the primary key. So let us see whether what we understand, whether that is what entity framework is doing or not. So let me run the application. Right. So first of all, you can see this is a select statement. Based on the select statement, right, it is taking the data based on the student ID. Now you can see, so how many times we have applied this method?
2 times.
But how many select statement are there?
1.
And why? Because in this case, once it pastes the data based on the student ID, the context object is storing that student ID in the snapshot. And again, whenever I'm fetching the data, again for the same student ID, it is going to check the context object, whether this data is already there in the local or a local it is storing the student's data or not. If it is already available, already there in the snapshot, then no need to go to the database to fetch the same data again. So it is going to return the data from the local, right, wherever it is stored. From there only it is returning the data. So this is the first level of caching which is provided by Entity Framework Core. So as we are using find method, so it is going to do this thing, right? So in this case, you can see only one select statement, even though we have written this find method 2 times, only one select statement. Clear?
You are already storing in student tutor, so that's why working only one query, one select query.
Sorry?
Cache memo.
I'm not
Like
getting
what
what
you
is your
said, like you were saying that we are using the two find methods, right?
Mm.
One find method storing in the where of student one, and another find method storing in the student two.
See, in this case, the student 1 and the student 2, these are the variable where we want to store the student data. But in this case,
Yeah.
this is going to generate some select statement which is going to be executed on the database. So in this case, you can see it is generating the select statement, which is which the framework sent to the database, execute the select statement on the database, retrieve the data, and whatever data is retrieved, that is going to be stored inside the student object. That is what it
Yeah.
is doing. But when I'm executing the second statement, so in this case, it is not generating any new SQL select statement. It is not sending that select statement to the database and fetching the data. Why? Because before preparing the select statement and executing the select statement in the database, so it will check. This is the find method, which is taking the primary key, right? And in this case, what exactly it is going to check? It is going to check to this context object already having the student who the ID is 1. Already the context object tracking the snapshot is created where the data is already there. So if the data, if the same data what I'm requesting here is already in the context object, then why should I go to the database again? So in this case, it will retrieve the data from the snapshot or whatever the Xerox you can consider from locally, whatever data it is storing, and from there only it is going to populate the student data. Clear, guys?
Yep.
Right. So now if you look at this select statement, update statement, here you can see it is only updating the email and the last name based on the student ID. Clear?
Hmm.
It's not including the first name, even though we are providing this first name here, but the value is same. Whatever the value here, that is already in the database, or you can say already in the snapshot. So it is not including that first name. Other properties are not also considered for updation. Only the property value which are changed between the snapshot and the student entity, those values are going to be updated into the database. Clear or not? Clear, guys? What is happening behind the scene? Is that clear? How it is right, handling update operation?
So these are being
Sir,
logged.
can you show us like how you open this Microsoft Visual Studio debug window?
Sorry?
Command line.
So this is the console window, man.
debug.
You attend the session from the beginning.
That's the log.
I'm
Log
asking
class
what
we
this,
added.
how I'm opening this window. I'm asking that person, did you attend the session from the beginning? What is here? You are asking question. Whenever I'm asking question, you become silent. This is not good. So if you are asking, I'm replying. And whenever I'm asking, you become silent. This is not one-way traffic. You will ask, I will answer, I will ask, you have to give the answer. So my question is, did you attend the session from the beginning or not? Okay, if you are not answering, then why I'm going to give answer to your question? Fine, no issue. Clear, guys? Can anybody tell me how this window is coming? Because we
You
enable,
added
We have
It's
configured
the
log,
bug
sir.
log.
we
yeah
enable
log 2.
logging.
Log
So
level.
using
Yeah.
option builder that log2 method, we enable that entity framework core logging information or higher level are going to be written into the console window. This is our console
Log to
window.
console. Yeah.
Yeah. With this console window, it is going to log the entity framework core logging statement. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Right. Now what I need to do is I want to show you the delete operation. Delete operation means if some record are no longer needed, if you want to delete some obsolete or wrong data, right? For that purpose, you need to implement delete operations. Again, there are two types of delete. One is soft delete, another one is hard delete. What is soft delete and what is hard delete? We'll discuss later. Soft delete means you will have one column like is active, is deleted, right? And that column will we need to toggle, right? To and on. And the hard delete means what? Physically you want to remove the data from the database. That is going to be your hard delete. And to perform the delete operation, again you can make use of the remove method of a DbSet or DbContext object, right? Any method you can use. I generally prefer to use the DbSet remove method because this will give me the clarity that which entity I'm going to remove, right? So let us try to
I have
understand
one
what.
question.
Yes, please.
Uh, there is a one update method as well, I
Not
think.
required, not required.
Okay.
So context dot update and I'm going to pass the student entity, not required. Why? Because this is already tracking by the, right, what I can say, entity framework code. So what update method you would know, right? Let me show you. So you might be talking about this context dot object method and this is what, right? So this is not required, right? Why? Because already the entity framework tracking the changes to these entities, right? Why I'm going to do this update method manually? Not required. Clear?
Okay.
So this is not
Yes.
required. This update method is not required. Automatically entity framework tracking these changes. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you the delete operation, right? For example, you can see there are many students right are there, and one of the student I want to delete, right? I want to delete the student ID, right? 3 or 1, whatever, right? So here, right, I'm showing you this option using first or default. So previous example, I have shown using the find method. Even in this case also you can go with the find method, no issue, right? So first of all default is fine. Okay, let me go with this first or default method, but you can also go with the find method. If you are using find method, you do not need to provide any lambda extension. Directly you can provide the primary key value. So here what I'm doing, I'm checking whether the student is available or not. If it is available, then whatever the student data before deletion, that what I'm showing here, right? And then I'm going to remove the student from the context object, right? So two options are there. You can go with this option or that option, right? The context dot students dot remove, and you have to pass the student entity what you want to remove, or directly you can pass this to the context object remove method. So in this case, it explicitly tells you that you are going to remove the student object. In this case, if you pass some wrong information, right, instead of student, if you pass right branch, then it will not give you any compile time error. It is going to delete the data. So I generally prefer the clarity. For clarity purpose, right, you need to go with this option, right? Student start remove. And in this case, when I remove the data, then it is not going to remove the data from the database. So what exactly it is going to do? It will mark the student entity state, right? It will mark the student entity state as deleted. Clear? So it will mark the student entity state as deleted. And when I call the step changes method, so when this step changes method is being called, it is going to generate based on the student entity state. It is going to generate a delete SQL statement, and that delete SQL statement is going to execute in the database, and the entity is going to be removed, right? So let me run the application. See, so in this case, first it is selecting the data from the database based on the student ID. So this is in this statement is generating the SQL select statement. You can see, and this is the delete statement based on the student ID. It is going to delete the data from the database. Clear, guys?
Yep.
Sir, is there any difference between context dot remove student and context dot entity that students dot remove student?
No, there is no performance wise, there is no differences, only clarity. Performance wise, there is no differences. Both of method are going to do the same thing internally. Say if I'm calling this one internally, it is going to store this entity into the student collection. Here we are directly storing or removing that entity from the student collections, right? So that is what.
Sir, I have one
Performance wise,
question.
yes, please.
Suppose my student object contains data for batch also.
But a batch operation, I'm not going to take any question.
Sorry,
I'm going to
branch details also, branch ID. And if we are using branch details, my student object contain details for branch ID. Okay, like a student dot branch ID. And if I'm using contacts dot remove student, will that delete branch details from the branch table?
say in this case, you just tell me. So student is the primary key table or it is the foreign key table?
Student ID is primary key for the student table.
Is that inside the students table, I'm storing this branch ID.
Right.
Branch ID is the
Foreign key.
primary foreign key. So if you are deleting the foreign key entry, do you think that it is going to delete that entity from the primary key table? There might be multiple students with the same branch ID. Do you think that if I'm deleting this branch ID, to delete that entity from the branch table? No. But coming to this one, if I delete this branch from this entity, then the corresponding entities from the students table, they are going to delete or not, right? That depends on how you maintain the foreign key relationship. Means there is something called on-delete cascade option, right? So
Yeah,
whether
right.
you want to update them with null value, right? Or you want to pick, right? So all these options are available, which we will discuss, right, one by one. Once you start discussing the primary key, foreign key, cascade delete behavior, cascade update behavior, everything is there in the pipeline, which I'm going to discuss.
Okay.
Right? But
So is that the reason you are not using DbSet? Maybe you have told us two options. Second option, you are not using to remove the data. You are keep on telling DbSet I'm not using, always I'm using dot students.
In this case, I'm using DbSet. Why you are thinking that I'm not using DbSet? So this is nothing but your
Contacts dot remove student. Sorry, second one. Contacts dot remove.
You can remove this one. I'm passing this student ID as true. Now run the application. It is going to remove the data. It is going to generate the same set of SQL statement.
Right. That is true, but you suggested us to always go with the first one mostly. So that's why I asked.
Just tell me, suppose I want to remove the student entity. Instead of student, if by mistake I pass the branch entity here, is it going to delete that branch from the database?
No.
Why
No.
Why no?
On cascade delete, yes, it can. Yes.
Forget about the primary key. Instead of a student, I provide the teacher object here. Then it is going to delete it from the database.
Right. Correct.
So you will get the clarity.
Yeah, I got the clarity now. Yeah.
Here, I'm using student means I only need to pass the student object.
Same object.
If I'm passing branch or other object, then it will give me compile time error. For clarity purpose, I'm preferring this one.
Right. I got it. I'm clear now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sure, for clarity.
Right now, Now what I'm going to discuss, this is the last piece what I'm going to discuss in today's session. Tomorrow I'm going to discuss how to design a real-time application. And also, many people are getting confused between eager loading, lazy loading, and explicit loading. So those three concepts I'm going to discuss tomorrow. But today, let us try to understand, the entity state. So now, if you check, there is a class called entity state, you can see this entity state enum. If you go ahead, then you will see, there are a different state. One is detached, unchanged, deleted, modified, and added. Okay, let me copy this one and come to here. Right. So the entity, so if the entity state is detached, means what? Means the entity framework core is not tracking this entity. If the entity state is detached, means the entity framework core is not tracking the entity. And guys, remember, whenever the entity is not being tracked by the context object, and if I'm going to call the set changes method, nothing is going to happen with that entity. It is not going to insert, update, and delete that entity until and unless that entity is not being tracked. And this detached entity state means the entity is not tracked. For example, for example, if I create one entity, okay, let me go ahead. I create one branch entity here, branch. So I just create one branch. And until unless I'm not adding that branch into the context object, either using the DbSet.Add method or context.add method, this entity is going to be in which state? Detached state.
Detached.
Right? So this is what the meaning of a detached state means. The entity is not being tracked. Now, if I'm doing something with this entity, and if I'm going to call this step changes, particularly in this example, do you think that it is going to insert this branch into the database? Tell me.
No, it's
No.
detached.
No.
It's detached.
So
Detached
in
state.
this
It's not
case,
hard.
so how it is going to? So currently, does this context object any idea about this entity? Are
No.
we add this entity to the context object?
Not registered.
So say, for example, so in your family, whoever staying in your family, you know about them. But someone is there in a different country or a different region or different state. Do you have any idea about that person? No, we don't have any idea. So similarly, the context you can consider this is the family. So within this context, whoever the family member, so those informations are going to be tracked by this context. Someone from outside the family, he have no idea. And someone outside the family, we consider them as detached. So in this case, this branch object, what we created here, it is outside of this context family. So outside of this context family means whenever I'm calling the set changes method, nothing is going to happen with this entity. Clear? Yes or
Yeah.
no?
Yeah.
So this is detached means the entity framework is not going to be tracked. And guys, remember, whenever we add an entity, then that entity is going to be, if we are creating one entity, and if that entity is not being tracked by the context object, then that entity state is going to be detached entity. Clear or not? Yes or no? So detached did clear means
Clear.
consider that
Yes, sir.
in DB context doesn't have any relation with the detached entity. So detached entity means the DB context doesn't have any idea about such entities. He can't do anything with the detached entities. Clear? Yes or no?
Yeah.
So unchanged entity means what? The entity exists in the database. Unchanged means what? Exist in the database. Exist in the database as well as tracked by the context object. Tracked by the context object. My P is not working correctly in my machine. All right, tracked by the context object. And here, right, whatever the data in the database, the same data available here also. For example, in this case, so particularly in this example, so I fetch the data from the student object. So at this point of time, the student entity, is it exist in the database?
Yes.
Yes.
Is a student entity tracked by the context object?
Yes.
Yes.
And in this case, the student entity data, is it same as the data what is there in the database?
Yes.
Yeah.
If this is the scenario, means what? This is unchanged entity state. Clear or not?
Yeah.
Or means what exist in the database, tracked by the context object. The context object, whatever data stored right is there for the student entity or whatever entity, the same data is also available in the database. Means there is no change in data. That means the entity state is going to be unchanged. And if the unchanged state, right? If I call the step changes method, nothing is going to be happen.
Hmm.
And it makes sense. Why nothing is going to happen, can anybody tell? Because in this case, the data, whatever there in the entity and the data there in the database is same. If the data is same, do I need to create any new object? Do I need to modify it? Do I need to delete? No. If I'm not going to insert update and modify, then what operation I need to do? No operation. No operation means unchanged. Unchanged means there is no operation going to happen. For example, so in this case, if I call the context dot set changes method, nothing is going to be happen. Clear?
Yeah.
Clear?
Yes.
Right? Now, so deleted state. Deleted state means what? That tell me, you only answer me. If the entity exists in the database,
Yes.
the entity is going to be exist in the database, right? And then what we need to do? We need to mark the, we need to, if the entity is marked with a, right? If you call the remove method, right? If you call the remove method, then the entity is going to be marked as deleted. Clear? The data
Yeah.
exists in the database and you call the remove method. Once you call the remove method, right, this entity state is going to be deleted state. And when I call the step changes method, for example, in this case, this is unchanged. So at this point of time, the entity state is unchanged.
Unchanged.
Right? Unchanged. And now what I'm doing here, I'm using context dot, right, students dot remove method and passing. So at this point of time, what will be the entity state? It will be marked
Delete.
entity
Deleted.
as deleted. And when
When we
I
call
call
the remove
this
method.
method, so in this case, it is going to generate the delete SQL statement. Clear? Clear or not? So this deleted means entity state is going to be deleted. Clear or not?
Yeah, Pranay.
So
Next
with
one
remove, excuse me. So
Yes.
that is with remove, with add, you are tracking. The DB context is tracking when you use add. DB context is tracking, and when you use remove, then the state becomes deleted.
Yes.
Or
What
not?
is the query? What is the query?
Now I'm trying to recall what you said, that with remove is deleted when you use the method remove. It means the entity state is deleted.
So you just tell me. You just tell me what remove means what?
To remove it, to delete it, that's remove.
So
But when
remove
you
means
save, well, that is when it runs the query. When you save it, save changes, then that is when it is removed.
so
Finally,
you have to remember two things. Context means what? And the database means what? Context means it is your entity framework or DP context. Database means your SQL Server instance. So in this case, if I do not call this statement, right, do you think that only calling this remove method, it is going to remove the data from the database?
no.
So when the database, when it is going to remove the data from the database?
When you cause save changes,
So
then it will execute the query.
So how the entity framework will able to know, came to know that I need to generate the delete SQL statement or remove or insert a SQL statement or update SQL statement? How the entity framework will able to know?
I will say with the method save changes, it will generate the
So in
appropriate
this
query.
case, right? In this case, whether to generate the insert statement or update statement, right? Or you can say uh, update statement, right? How the entity framework will able to know? For this particular student entity, I need to execute delete SQL statement or insert SQL statement or update SQL statement. What SQL statement I need to generate? How the framework will able to know?
I think from the context, from the
Line number
context
17.
state, the
So
state
not
in
for the
state.
whatever
entity
is
state.
about context. Context is nothing. So based on the entity state, whatever the
Yeah,
current entity state, so that based on the current entity state, if the entity state is added, then it is going to generate insert statement. If the entity state is modified, then it is going to generate update statement. If the entity state is deleted, then it is going to generate delete SQL statement. So how you will mark the entity state as deleted? If you want to mark an entity state as deleted, so that the save changes method going to generate a delete SQL statement, then in that case, you need to use this remove method. So once you call this remove
yeah,
method, this entity state is going to be marked as a deleted. And when you call the save changes method for this deleted entity state, it is going to generate delete SQL statement. Clear?
yeah. Okay, thanks.
Right? So now modified means
So,
what, guys? Yes.
so I have a question.
Yes, please.
So when you write context dot save changes, that time can this method give us back how many records has been updated or deleted?
Yeah, definitely, right? So in this case, a variable output. So in this case, right, how many rows are affected? That number it is returning. If you
Okay.
want, you can store and you can write whatever you want to do, but it doesn't make any sense, right? Means if it is your requirement, you can store it. Because, right, if you go to the definition of save changes method, it is returning some integer parameter, specifying, right, what I can say, specifying how many number of records are affected by the save changes method. Right, so everything, right? Everything I'm going to discuss how to when to use this output parameter, all these things. Not at this point. So we need to go step by step. But yes, that is possible. So next one is modified. Modified means what? The entity is exist in the database. So entity is exist in the database, and some of or all of the properties are updated, or you can say modified means whatever the property value, this is not same as the value whatever we stored in the database. If there is a difference, then it is going to generate, it is going to mark the data as modified. And for the modified entity state, it is going to generate what SQL statement, guys? It is going to generate update SQL statement. And if you add any entity using the add method of the DbSet, or you can say DbContext. So add means what, guys? Added means what? In this case, you just tell me. In this case, exist in the database. In the case of modified, also it is exist in the database. In the case of added, do you think that the entity exists in the database?
No.
So
No.
in this case, it is not exist in the database. If the entity is not exist in the database and it is being tracked by the context object, means what? The entity is going to be in added state.
Added
And how
method.
to make sure one entity is going to be in added state? By using the add method of the DbContext or DbSet. Clear? And when we call the save changes method, the entity for which the entity state is added, it is going to generate insert SQL statement. Clear or not?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right? So the point that you need to remember, right, for this detached entity means the entity framework is not tracking these entities at all. All other entities are being tracked by the right. And all other entities are going to be tracked by the DbContext object. For unchanged entity, it is not going to do anything else. For deleted, it is going to generate write delete. For modified, it is going to generate update. And for added, it is going to generate insert SQL statement, right? So let us understand these things through this diagram. So if the entity state is detached, it is not going to be tracked by the DbContext object. If it is added state, updated, modified state, deleted state, unchanged state, then that is going to be tracked by the DbContext object. Added state means it is going to generate insert statement when you call the save changes method. For modified, it is going to generate update statement when you call the save changes method. For deleted entity state, it is going to generate the delete SQL statement when you call the save changes method. Entities which are unchanged. Unchanged means, don't think that unchanged means it is not tracking by the context object. It is being tracked by the context object. But as the entity state is unchanged means what? Whatever the data in the database and whatever the data the context object is holding for that particular entity, the data is same. As the data is same, when you call the save changes method, for such entities, nothing will clear or not.
Sure. Thanks.
Clear, guys? Okay. And how the change tracking is working, I have already given. So whenever we retrieve a data, right, for the added state, right, we are adding that using the add method. But for other thing, modified, deleted, unchanged, right? In these three scenarios, the data is exist in the database. So in those scenarios, whenever we are retrieving the data from the database, so what entity framework are going to do is it is going to create a snapshot with the original data. And whenever we are modifying or deleting, right, it is going to check original data with the snapshot data. If there is a difference, then it is going to set the entity state as modified. If there is no difference, then it is going to set the entity state as unchanged. If you call the remove method, then it is going to set the entity state as deleted, right? That is what it is happening. Clear or not? Okay. So let us try to understand this thing, right, with few more example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to again reset the database. So for this purpose, first of all, I'm truncating the students data. I'm deleting all the branches, and here I'm resetting the branch ID. Now let us try to understand this all these things, right? Entity state. Now again I'm going to show you, I'm going to display you the entity state. What is the entity state before the save changes and after the save changes, so that you will get the clarity. So here what I'm doing, I'm creating one branch. So this is one branch I'm creating, and I'm creating one student, right? So I'm creating one student. Now you guys tell me, so before, right, currently once this entity is created, so what will be the entity state? Is this entity at this point of time, at the line number 20, is this entity is tracked by the context object?
No.
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 If it is not being tracked, then what is the entity state out of this 5?
Detached.
So at this point, the entity state is going to be detached. And at this point also, the entity state is going to be detached or not?
Detached. Yes.
Let's assume, right? So if you want to see what is the entity state, then what you can do is using the context object. This is the context object. There is a method called entry method, which is going to, and to this method, we need to pass one entity, and that entity method ID is going to return. What is the current state? What are the properties? What are the relationship, right? All this information, it is going to return me. So for now, what I'm doing here, context dot right, context dot entry. So I'm passing the student entity, and what is that state? State means what is the current state of the student entity. So that is what it is going to print. So at this point, what should be the entity state? It should display
Detached.
detached. So in this case, it should return me detached state now. So I have already discussed, right? We can add the entity in two ways, using the DbSet.Add method, or you can add, right, using the context, right, .add method. So once I add this entity to this context object, so at this point of time, what should be the entity state? Is this entity available in the database?
No.
No. And here we are using what method? Add method. Add method means
Added state.
Added state. And added state means what? Now I'm calling this statement here. So at this particular point of time, what should be the entity, student entity state? It should
Added.
added. right? So in this case, right now, next what I'm doing here, I'm calling the step changes method, guys. So when I call the step changes method, then what SQL statement it should generate now?
Insert.
So
Insert.
generate insert SQL statement, right? So once it generate the insert SQL statement, now the student entity is available in the database. Yes or no? Yes or no?
When you call save changes, then it will
So
go
when
in.
you call the step changes, so whatever the student entity, this entity is going to be inserted into this student's table or not?
Yes.
Currently,
Yes, yes.
Yes.
will be inserted here. Now, once it is inserted, now tell me whatever the data in the student entity, right? Is the same data available here within the student object or different data?
Different data.
Different data. No, same.
How different data?
Same.
How different data?
Same data.
Passing here,
Yes.
this first name, last
Yeah.
name, date of birth, gender. Is different data is going to store or the whatever data I'm passing, this data it
The
is going to store
same.
in the
The
Same.
same. The same.
What you are
So,
passing the data that will be stored in,
sorry.
like what are you passing, like first name equal to John, last name equal to
Actually,
Don. So that data will be stored.
so that means what? So whatever my student entity holding, the same data is going to be stored in this database or a different data?
Same.
Same data.
Same data. The student ID that is going to be auto-generated, and once they inserted, that student ID automatically going to be populated inside this entity, right? That is what taken care by the entity framework. Now you just tell me. So if this student entity data is same as the data which is there in the database, then what should be the entity state?
Unchanged.
Unchanged.
So
Unchanged.
how modified? So you just tell me, modified means properties are different. So in this case, whatever the data in the database, the same data it is there in the student object. That means the data exists in the database as well as tracked by the context object and the same data,
But nothing
right?
will be happen. Yeah.
So same data
Same
means
data.
in this case the entity state is going to be. Let's tell me what should be the entity state at this point of time.
Unchanged.
Unchanged.
Unchanged. Clear? So now let's run the application and see whatever we understand whether that is what we are getting on. So first of all, this is detached. Okay, let me come to this place. So yes. So in this statement, right, whatever line number 36, here it is printing the entity state as detached. And in line number 45, it should print the entity state as added. So detached and added, fine. Yes or no?
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
Then
sir.
Then
in
it's
this case, and in this case, when I call the step changes method, it is inserting two
insert.
insert statement. One is for the branch entity, another one is for the student entity. Here you can see one is for branch and one is for student, right? Clear or not?
Yeah.
Right? After the
Yes.
step changes, what should be the entity state? It should print the entity state as on change, right? After the insert statement, is the entity change state ready changed to unchanged?
Yes.
Clear how the entity state are being tracked by the context object, how the entity state is changed from unchanged, right, added to right unchanged to added to modified to in this case modified will not come into the picture. In this case unchanged added and added sorry detached to added
Detached
and
to added, added to
added to
unchanged.
unchanged, right? Now if you do some modification, right, with this entity, for example, you want to do some modification here, then again that entity will be changed to modified state. Clear, guys?
Unchanged.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So this is what happening behind the scene, right? Now we'll understand the example of unchanged, right? So we have already discussed unchanged means what? The data exists in the database as well as exist in the context object, and both are having the same data. For example, I'm fetching the student entity here. So at this point of time, what should be the entity state?
Unchanged.
Unchanged.
Why unchanged? Because the data exists in the database, and whatever the data this context object holding for the student entity, the same data is there in the database, right? So as the data is same, And as the data is exist in the database, as this is tracked by the context object, means the entity state is going to be unchanged. So here you can see I'm displaying the entity state. So in this case, it is going to display the entity state as unchanged. Then if I'm calling the step changes method, do you think that any kind of SQL statement is going to be generated here?
No.
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 Right? In this case, it is going to display no operation were performed, and again here it is going to display the same entity state unchanged, right? So let me run the application and show you this thing. So what is the entity state here? Unchanged. Right? No operation was performed, and again it is unchanged, right? So basically, if there is no changes with the data, what is there in the right, context object and what is there in the database, then there is no operation, right? No insert, update, and delete operation is going to be performed. Clear? So what I have seen, unchanged means nothing is going to be happen. Nothing is going to be happen means what? No SQL statement are going to be generated by the context, by the step changes method. Clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Next, attaching an existing entity to the context object, right? So this is right. You can consider, right? You can consider. Okay. So this is one scenario you can consider. This is right, a disconnected entity scenario. For example, right, imagine a system, right, where a background job processes a list of students, and the object might come from an external source. Okay, let me explain this thing directly with an example, so you will get the more clarity. Rather than discussing the theoretical concept, if I explain this practically, you will understand. Let's assume, right, these are the list of students, right, which we want to update, and we get this information, right, from the external data source. Let's assume. So currently, you can see there is one, right, student is there, and let's assume like this, right? There are thousands of students are there, and those thousands of students we want to update, and we get this data from an external source, either from a API or either from a Excel sheet, right? From any source, we get this list of students which we want to update. But now, if you look at the students to be updated, so this student, right, exist in the database or not? Student with the ID. Is this student with the ID exist in the database?
Yes.
Yes, with ID one.
Yes.
Yes, it existed.
Already, if it is exist, then can I use the add method?
No.
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 We cannot use the add method. Why
I
I
use
can use
update method.
add method?
Primary
unique.
restriction constraint.
Right?
Exactly.
If I'm using the add method, then what will happen? In that case, right, it is going to add the entity with added state, right? Yes or no? If I'm using the add method, then that entity, those entities are going to be added, right, stored with the added state, and in added state means insert statement is going to be generated. So instead of updating the data, again a new entry is going to be inserted into the database. That is what we don't require. That means that add functionality is not going to work any. Clear?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
Now
sir.
this list of student, is this list of student we fetch from the database, or this is coming from an external source?
External.
External source means if this is to list of student, it's being currently tracked by the context object.
No.
No, sir.
No.
No means in this case, what will be the entity state?
Detached.
Detached.
Right. So until and unless if I'm not attaching this list of students to the context object, I cannot perform any update operation. Based on the student ID, I want to update the phone number and email address. Until and unless I'm not attaching the student list of students or students to the context object, I cannot update the email and phone number based on the student ID. Is this possible? No. Why? Currently, it is not going to do anything. Why? Because the entity state is attached. Let us see how we can do this. So first of all, right, I'm creating the context object, and whatever list of student, right, what I'm doing here, I'm looping through all the students. So currently, right before attach method, so at this point of time, what should be the entity state?
Detached.
Detached.
Ideally, it is going to be detached entity state, right? And then, right, attach the student to the context object. So in this case, when I add this entity object, right, to the student collection using the attach method, so in this case, entity state is going to be unchanged. So in this case, the entity state, it is going to be unchanged. So basically, if I'm using this attach method to add some existing student, the entity state is going to be unchanged. So at this point of time, it is going to display the entity state as unchanged. But that is what not our requirement. So what is our requirement? Our requirement is we want to update the phone number and email of all, right, this list of students. So for that purpose, what I need to do, right, we need to specify this thing manual. So context.entity, right, context.entry. So entry means you need to specify the object. So which already attached to the context object. So let me add this entity and let me set that phone number is modified. Let me set email is modified. So once these two statements are executed, then what will happen? Now this updated student entity, right, this state is changed to modified. So it is right, the entity state is changed to modified. So at this point, right, it is going to display the entity state as modified. Now, once the entity state is modified, then what we need to do? We need to call the step changes method and it is going to generate the update statement. Once the update statement is executed, right, again, if you go ahead and display the entity state, it is going to be unchanged. Because whatever the changes, once it is updated into the database, then it is going to be in update, right? So let me run the application and right, show you this thing practically. So first of all, what is the entity state? Detached. And right, if you look at this example, so whenever I'm printing, this is entity state detached, clear? So before attaching that entity to the context object using the attach method, so what is the entity state? Entity state is going to be detached. Clear? This statement is clear,
Yes, sir.
right? And once I attach that entity to the context object using the attach method, that entity state is going to be unchanged. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Right? And after attaching that entity, so currently it is in unchanged state. And here I want to mark these two properties as a modified property. So in this case, updated entity, so phone number and email is modified. So once I set these two properties are modified, automatically, right, this will set the entity state as modified. So now you can see the entity state as modified. So once the entity state as modified, when the save changes method is called, so it is going to generate the update SQL statement, updating the email and the phone number property where student ID is this. And once the update operation is completed successfully, then if you check the entity state, definitely whatever the data having with these properties, the same data is updated into the database. So it is going to mark the entity state as unchanged. Clear?
Yes.
Sir,
Yes,
if external data source have more than 500 columns, though we have to write manual is modified command for everyone.
You just tell me, just show me one table where you have a 500 columns.
But sometimes 100, I have seen 100, more than 100.
Yes, if you are saying more than 100 means you are not following the right, what I can say, normalization concept.
No, but that DB is created by someone else, sir, but I have seen, that's why I
That,
asked.
that is fine. So if that is your requirement, right, so you need to right handle in a different manner. Different manner in
Okay,
the sense,
okay.
you need to update all the column properties or any
Okay.
specific
One by one.
properties? No,
Okay, okay.
I'm asking. So do you want to update all the column values or specific columns?
Yes, maybe requirement is like that, update for all.
Right? If you are going to update for all, then you just clean the database and whatever data you want to update, delete those data and insert them directly. right? Set the
Okay.
identity of and insert them. That's it,
Okay.
right? So ideally,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
if you are looking at more than 100 columns in a database, means you are not following the right standard normalization concept. You should split the
But
data.
I have seen, sir, more than 100 columns I have seen in a
That
single
I'm
table.
saying, I'm saying, I'm not agree. I'm not right saying it is not possible. More than 100, you can put more than 200.
Yes, sir,
Not
I've
an
seen.
not an issue. But what I'm saying, if you are putting more than 100 column means what? Means you are not following the right normalization concept.
It's not
So
normalized, yeah.
yeah, normalized is not there. So ideally, you should not put all the data into a single database table, right? For example, you will only face the problem, right? Why? Because if I'm retrieving the data, right? For example, for example, let's take the example, right? For example, you are designing one database for the student management. So I'm going to store student data, right? Address information, right? Course information, semester information, right? Semester information, then subject information, right? Their extracurricular activity, right? Many information are there, right? Extra activities. So in this case, right, if I'm putting all these things inside a single table, and for example, I only want to add, right? I only want to fetch the student address. Then in that case, right, I cannot achieve that functionality here. Why? Because if I'm querying the student table, I'm going to get all this data, which doesn't make any sense, right? So we should split
Yes.
the data into multiple tables. If right, I don't know, right, how you are creating 100 columns, if that is your requirement,
No,
or
it was
even
created by my senior actually, sir. There is a
that's what I'm
transaction
saying.
table and they have multiple log tables. So I have seen that more than
I-
100 columns. That.
I'm saying I'm not right. Saying it is not possible. It is possible. Thing is that whoever created the table, he doesn't have any idea about the relationships. He doesn't have any idea related to right how to maintain one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many relationship between the table. Right? He doesn't have any right in the database idea. That is the reason why creating one table, putting everything inside that table. Right?
That-
So if that is possible, if you are going with the denormalization concept, right, where you are not going to perform right any day-to-day transaction, right? Again, you are saying transactional table, right? Transactional
Yes.
table means you should not, you should follow proper, right? What I can say, normalization. If it is a table where you are storing the data only for viewing purpose, right? Historical data, yes, we can consider creating right without normalization. I mean, following denormalization is fine, but transactional data means you should follow normalization concept, right? So in
Yes,
your
sir.
scenario, right, if you want to update all the data, right, then you need to find a different approach because, right, I don't think, right, anyone, uh, what I can say, we are going to update this data one by one, right? It doesn't make any sense. In that case, right, what you
Yeah,
need to
that's
do,
why I asked.
right? So in that case, what you need to do is, right? So in this case, I'm marking this as modified, right? So in that case, you need to directly state that the entity state is modified, right? For example, right, instead of marking this entity as modified, you need to directly set the entity state as modified. So how you can set? So you have to set this one, right? So in that case, you just need to mark the entity state as modified. Entity state equal to entity state dot modified. Right? So here you need to specify this one. That's it. So based on the primary key column, whatever properties values you have provided, every value it is going to update into the database. Clear?
Yes.
Right? So in that case, you can do something like this. Something like this means you have to do this. So all the properties are going to be updated. Clear or not?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Right here we are explicitly specifying because these two property we want in the update statement, but here all the properties right are going to be updated. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let us see one example of a detached entity state, right? So detached, okay, detached entity state, right? Okay. So what exactly our requirement is, right? Let's assume we are storing some data into the database table, right? There are many, let's assume there are thousands of data are there. Now, what is our requirement? Whatever the domain name, right? We are changing the domain. So instead of .NET-tutorials.com, we just want to update this value to .NET-tutorials.net or some xyz.com, right? So basically, whatever all students they are having this domain .NET-tutorials.com, we want to update that domain name, right? And again, guys, remember. So what I need to do is, so in this case, first of all, I need to fetch all the data. So in this case, this statement it is going to return me all the right student who are having this .NET-tutorials.com domain. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right. So it is going to fetch all the entities. So at this point, right, what should be the entity state in this case? Guys, tell me.
Unchanged.
Unchanged. So there is nothing called unmodified, only unchanged or modified, right? So now what is my requirement, right? So and guys remember, so in this case, right, if 1,000 records are being retrieved from the database, let's assume 1,000 records are retrieved. So these 1,000 records are going to be tracked by this context object or not? Unchanged
Yes,
means it is
Yes.
being tracked by the context object or not?
Yes.
Right? Suppose I'm giving one task, right? So I have given one task to you that please track that guy, what he is doing from the morning to till night, please track. So one guy you can give full right? Focus in you can track that guy easily. If I'm saying, okay, not one guy, there are 100 guys are there, please go ahead and track all of them. For that purpose, you need to give more emphasis, more time, or it is easily you can track. That means what? If the context object is tracking very less number of entities, then it is going to give a better performance. The context object is tracking more number of entities, it is going to give you less performance. Clear or not?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Right. So in this case, if it is retrieving 100,000 of records, if those records are going to be tracked by the context object for a longer period of time, definitely it is going to give you less performance. So what I need to do is, so as soon as I update the domain, right, I want to detach that entity from the context object. Because once I update the domain of a particular student, doesn't make any sense to track that entity anymore. So what we can do is, once we update the information, detach that entity from the context object. Let us see how we can do this. So in this case, what I'm doing here, so I have created one private method where I'm passing the current student email address and I'm passing what is the updated domain name. So this email address is going to be replaced with this domain name, and that logic what I have written here. So what I'm doing here, right, I'm splitting the email based on the @ operator, and if anything is present right after the @ operator, if index is greater than 0, then what I'm doing here, I'm just altering, means the second part, whatever the domain name I have here, that is what I'm replacing with the old domain name, and that new right email address I'm driving here. This logic you can check by yourself, right? Because logic is not important, right? Understanding the concept is important. So basically, existing email address, new domain I'm taking, and if there is after the @ operator, if anything is there, means if index is greater than 0, I mean after @ if domain is there, then it is going to return 0, 1. So 1 is greater than 0. In that case, right, we are just replacing the second part, I mean the index position 1 with the new domain. And that what we are returning from this method, right? So once the email is there, right, I mean the student email address is updated, automatically at this point of time, the entity state will be set as what will be the entity state at this point of time?
Modified.
Changed.
So how? In this case, it is going to be modified. Why? Because in this case, unchanged, and whatever the student email address, that what we have modified. Once the student email address is modified, means whatever the data in the database, and here the data in the email column is different. Different means entity state will be modified. Modified means in this case, right, what exactly it is going to do? It is going to generate the update SQL statement. Clear? Clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So once if you update the data for better performance, do I need this entity to be anymore tracked by the context object?
No.
Any necessity is there? Yes, tell me. So once we
Not
update
required.
the email address of a particular student, is there any necessity to track that entity anymore? If yes,
No.
no issue. If no, then you should mark that entity state as a detached. How? Right? The way we are, right, I have shown you the previous example, how to mark the entity state as modified. Same way. So entity state equals to modified. So once I make this statement as modified, the current entity which is processed by the server is no longer tracked by the context object. So in this case, so as long as one by one the entity are processed, they are also going to be detached from the context object. That it is going to give you better performance. So the point that what you need to remember, once the entity is right, it's no longer required by the context object. Don't give that right. Please try to make that entity detached so that the entity is not right. It is not going to track anymore, and ultimately you will get better performance. Right. So let me run the application and show you this thing. Right. So you can see, all right, all the student process successfully. And once the student is updated, we have detached, and here you can see the entity state as detached, right? So basically here we have written this statement to display the entity state. Here it is showing entity state as detached. Clear? Detached means what? It is no longer tracked by the context of. Clear, guys?
So I have a question.
Yes.
So you have used a for each loop. So suppose you are getting 1,000 records to be updated with the new domain name. So will this create 1,000 update queries and then
Yes.
detach it? But
Yes.
isn't there any way like we use in SQL like update like
Definitely.
or in
Right. So what I'm saying from the beginning, bulk operation is there. And once time come, I'll show you how to perform bulk operations. But currently, we have not discussed how to perform the bulk operation. Bulk insert, bulk update, bulk delete, everything is possible, which we will discuss in our coming session.
okay.
Right. So currently, right, what I'm saying, we are going step by step. And bulk operation, I'm going to show you using the entity framework core method, using the third-party libraries, which one is going to give better performance, how exactly the bulk operation is handled, what is batching, right? What is the right default batching size, how we can right, increase the batch size, right? Everything I'm going to discuss. But now we have not right discussed any batch concept or bulk concept. We are just going one by one. Clear, guys?
Okay.
Sir, I have one question. Like previously, when we were updating, so we were using contacts.update.
Not required now.
So
That is what I'm
not
saying.
required. Hmm.
Yes, in this case, right, so this statement is no longer required, right? So what I'm saying, context, right, what you were talking about, context dot opted and this statement. This is not required anymore. Why? Automatically the context object is tracked and automatically the framework know, right, what is the, right,
Right.
what are values they are, right, are being changed or modified, right? Everything is being tracked by the context object, right? So that is the enhancement they have done with the entity framework. If you are talking about the
Okay.
entity framework, right, they are provided this enhancement, right? So you do not need to call this update method anymore. Why? Because entity framework and the context object tracking the changes. And based on the changes, automatically is deciding that what is the entity state, whether it is to update state or something else. So you do not need to call that update method anymore. If you
Okay.
call, no issue. It doesn't make any sense.
And
Clear?
sir, one more question. Yeah, clear. Sir, one more question. In your previous example, you had given student ID equal to 1. And if it is already existing in the database, we were updating 2 columns. Suppose that student ID equal to 1 doesn't exist in my database.
So in that case,
And that is, it will
see what.
insert.
How? So how it is going to
No.
insert? That is right. That is wrong now. Whatever the student
Okay.
ID, if it is not exist, then why should I insert that? So we are updating the data. If nothing is updating means what?
Okay.
If yes, if your requirement is that if this is not exist, then add. Then you have to write if student equals to null, update right. If student is not equals to null, update else. add that into the context object and call the set changes method, it is going to insert that entity. It is up to your requirement, right? If the data exists, I'm going to update. If not exist, I'm going to create. Not just write one if else condition. That's it.
Okay, so save changes will not find like whether we have to update or insert.
Save changes
That
doesn't, right? So it doesn't have. So whatever the entities are being tracked by the context object, all these entities are going to be, right, either inserted. Some of them are going to be updated. Some of them are going to be deleted, right? Anything is possible.
So, for example, there is a scenario where a student table contains 3 records and we are trying to add a 4th and 5th record. And for one of the existing record, we are trying to update it and delete one of the existing records. All are unique and we are trying to apply the context dot save changes at the end of all the.
Let me ask you, whatever your code is, right? All these things that I'm going to cover in our coming session. So currently we are just understanding the basic concept. What is entity state? So performing right multiple operations, some of the data is going to be inserted, some of the data going to be updated, some of the data is going to be deleted, right? Everything is possible, right? Just wait for some time. So this is, we are just starting. There are 50 chapters in Entity Framework course syllabus, and we are currently in the 5th or 6th number of chapter. Everything is there. I'm going to give you many different kind of real-time scenarios, examples, right? Covering all these concepts. Right? Just wait. So currently we are not discussing any right concept, right? We are just right any right kind of operation. We are just understanding what are the different entity states, how the entity right, how the SQL statement is generated based on the entity state. That is what we are currently discussing.
Sure,
Right. So
got
at
it,
the
sir.
end, right, definitely, right, whatever you are asking, I know, right, what are the questions you are going to ask, right, what you are, whatever question on your mind. But before that, do you know, right? So okay, so you are working with the entity framework, right, previously. Do you have any idea about this entity state before this session?
Not in this much detail, sir.
Right. So why? Because right, you have never thought about this thing.
True.
How the entity state is detached state, why it is not doing anything, how the SQL statement is generated, right? Have you ever think about this thing? What SQL statement is being generated by the right entity framework core or entity framework? Have you ever tried to log the statement and verify the same?
No, not really.
So see, if I'm showing every concept in depth, I'm going to explain. Just right, wait for some days, right? Because as I already told, minimum 10 sessions or 10 to 12 sessions, right? I'm going to take for entity framework core. So this example is clear, guys.
Yes, sir.
Right? So basically, what is the fundamental rule? Once you update, right? Once a entity is no longer required for your application, then instead of right making right instead of tracking that entity, please detach that entity from the context object for better performance. Clear? So in this case, the student entity is no longer required once I update the data. So I can easily detach that entity from the context object so that, right, I will get better performance. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the modified example, which we have already discussed. And okay, let me give you one more time, right? So instead of using this first method, you can also make use of what method? Find method. And to this find method, you cannot pass any lambda expression. You need to pass the primary key value directly. If the student is not equals to null, then what is the initial entity state? I'm modifying the phone number. And here I'm saying the what will be the entity state after this modification, calling the save changes method, and then also I'm showing. So in this case, what will be the entity state, guys?
Modified, unchanged.
Unchanged, right? And after the modification, at this point, what will be the entity state?
Modified.
Modified. After the save changes, what will be the entity state?
Unchanged.
Unchanged.
Why? Because after save changes, whatever changes we are doing, that is going to be updated into the database, right? So before that, let me check, right, what will be the value for the one number. So 1 1. Okay, fine. So we are providing some different value, right? Okay, let me run the application. right? So first of all, it is selecting the data. First, it is unchanged, then modified, then generating the update step, and it is unchanged. Clear? Any doubt related regarding this example? Why the and what will be the state? Why it is generating the right update SQL statement? Why it is including only this phone number in the update SQL statement? Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. The last one is right deleted entity state. So deleted entity state means right again as we already discussed, the entity exists in the database, and once we retrieve the entity, we need to call the remove method, right? So in this case, what will be the entity state, guys?
Unchanged.
Unchanged. Once I call this remove method, what will be the entity state? It will mark the entity state as. Guys, tell me. Mark entity state as deleted.
Deleted.
Right. So in this case, it is going to print the entity state as deleted. And after the save changes, what will be the entity state? Guys, tell me. After the save changes, what will be the entity state? This is what I have provided here. Okay. So what will be the entity state? Guys, tell me. So in this case, you just tell me. In this case, once you call the save changes method, what SQL statement it is going to generate?
Delete.
Delete SQL statement. So once you execute the delete SQL statement, what will happen? The entity is going to be
Detached.
deleted from the database or not?
Detached.
So in this case, the entity is going to be deleted from the database or not?
Yes.
Yes.
If the entity is no longer available, do you think that that is going to be tracked by the context anymore?
No.
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 So if
Oh,
the
detached.
tracked by the context object, then if you are trying to display the state, then what will happen? Clear?
Detached.
Clear? Why detached? Because it is no longer tracked by the context object. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Right? And based on the entity state, whatever the operations are going to be done by the save changes method, we have already discussed. Right? For unchanged, nothing is going to be done by the save changes method. For added state, it is going to generate an insert SQL statement. For modified, it is going to generate the update SQL statement. For delete, it is going to generate the delete SQL statement. Right? When the save changes method is going to be called. Clear or not?
Clear.
Yes or no? Okay. So tomorrow what I'm going to discuss, right, how to design a real-time application, right, right, only the design part using entity framework or code first approach. So basically 5-6 tables, right, I'm going to create based on the relationship one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. And then I'm going to insert some data, and then I'm going to discuss three important concepts, right, in entity framework code. One is eager loading, one is lazy loading, and another one is explicit loading. So these things we are going to cover in tomorrow's session. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Right, so any question related to today's session, you guys can ask. And guys, this is very, very important, right? If you understand what is happening behind the scene, you will get more clarity. And instead of writing the code without understanding what is happening behind the scene, it is better to first understand what are the things happening behind the scene. What is entity state? How the entity state is going to be tracked by the right entity framework code, or right how the entity right state changed, right, when we are doing some operation, right, after set changes, what will be the entity state, how the right entity framework code going to generate insert update and SQL statement, right, it is based on the entity state. How you can check what will be the entity state, right? For that purpose, you need to write this context.entry state right property. If you want to mark the entity state as modified, manually updated, right, then also you can do this by using this context.entry, whatever the entity, that state you can set. Right? Anyone having any more question, guys?
Yes, sir, I have one question.
Okay.
Sir, every day it's not related to today's session. Every day I'm just listening and understood the thing. So what kind of things shall I do from my side? Means, should I practice by
I'm not getting. So
what
what
kind
do
of
you think?
things? What kind of
Kind of?
things should I do from my side for the practice purpose?
So what kind of things you need to do from your side for practice purpose? You have to do practices.
Yes, sir.
You have to do
No, sir,
practices
I'm
only.
just listening the things every day. I'm just
Not
listening the
listening, right?
session.
So not listening.
Mm,
I am sharing the documentations. So I'm sharing this documentations with you guys. For what purpose I am providing
yes,
this
sir.
document? You need to do practices. While doing the practices, do some research, do some modification, and see how it is impacting, right? What is happening? That's what you need to do. Until and unless, right, you are not doing practices, only listening is not doesn't make any sense. You have to do practices. And whatever example I'm providing, more than sufficient. If you understand this thing in depth, that is more than sufficient.
Okay. Okay.
Right? Practice is important. Yes. Anyone having any more question, guys? Okay. Thank you, guys. See you tomorrow. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.